Dad said girls don't need inheritance until he learned I was executor of Grandpa's estate. My dad said it like he was stating a law of nature. Girls don't need inheritance. We were seated around a polished conference table that smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and old paper, and his voice filled the room the way it always did, confident, loud, like the air belonged to him. The attorney's office was too cold, the kind of cold that makes your skin prickle under a sweater. My aunt Denise's rings clicked against her coffee cup. My brother, Kyle, stared at the framed certificates on the wall instead of anyone's face. I felt my jaw tighten so hard my teeth ached, but Dad didn't even look at me when he said it. He looked at the attorney, Mr. Feldman, like they were two men discussing logistics and the rest of us were background noise. My father knew what mattered, Dad continued, tapping his finger on the table with every word. The business, the land, the legacy. My son will take care of his own sister. That's how it works. Before I could stop myself, I pushed my chair back and the legs scraped the carpet with a harsh sound that made everyone flinch. The movement jolted my nerves awake. My hands were sweating, and the folder in front of me, my folder, felt suddenly heavier, like it had gained weight while we sat there. Mr. Feldman's gaze flicked to me, calm and practiced. Dad finally turned his head, eyebrows lifting in that familiar warning expression. Hannah, he murmured, like my name was a leash. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud enough to drown out the hum of the air conditioner. Please, my mom whispered from the end of the table, her voice thin, eyes shiny, begging me without saying the words, don't make this worse. I swallowed, tasting stale coffee and adrenaline, and said, that's not how Grandpa wrote it. Dad's mouth twisted into a smile that wasn't kind. Oh, sweetheart, he said, and the condescension in that one word made my face heat. You don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Feldman cleared his throat and reached for the stack of documents. Actually, he said gently, Ms. Caldwell does. It was a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after my grandfather died, when Mr. Feldman called me directly. I was sitting in my car outside the grocery store because I couldn't bring myself to go inside and pretend the world was normal enough for produce. My phone buzzed, and I almost ignored it because grief makes everything feel like static. When I answered, a steady voice said, Hannah Caldwell. This is Martin Feldman. I'm your grandfather's attorney. I'm calling regarding his estate. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My first thought was that something had gone wrong. Some hidden debt, some mess Grandpa hadn't told anyone about. My second thought almost immediately was, Dad is going to make this about him. Grandpa was the only person in my family who treated me like my brain was an asset instead of a nuisance. When I was 13 and I asked why the sky looked different before a storm, he didn't laugh. He took me outside and pointed at the clouds and explained air pressure like it mattered. When I got a scholarship to a state school for finance, he was the only one who didn't say, why not teaching? That's more suitable. He just nodded and said, good. Learn how money moves. It'll keep you safe. He ran a small construction supply business for years, sold it before his knees went bad, and lived comfortably but quietly. He wasn't flashy. He was careful. He noticed things. My dad, on the other hand, noticed mostly himself. Dad always talked about legacy like it was something you deserved because you shared DNA. He'd parade my brother around at holidays. Kyle will take over someday. Even though Kyle had zero interest and visibly shrank every time Dad said it. When Grandpa started getting older and needed help with paperwork and medical stuff, Dad would show up when there was an audience. He'd carry grocery bags and dramatically kiss Grandpa's forehead, then tell everyone later how much he did. Meanwhile, I was the one actually handling things. The online bills, the insurance calls, the medication list, the spreadsheet of appointments. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because Grandpa would get overwhelmed and embarrassed, and I couldn't stand the look on his face when he felt helpless. The last year of his life, Grandpa and I developed this quiet rhythm. I'd visit on Sundays. We'd sit at his kitchen table, the one with tiny burn marks near the edge from decades of coffee mugs and ashtrays, and I'd go through mail with him. He'd shuffle papers, squint, then hand them over to me with a grunt like he was pretending it didn't matter. Sometimes he'd slide a folder across the table and say, "Tell me what this means." I'd explain it, and he'd nod like I'd confirmed something he already suspected. Once he said, almost casually, "Your father thinks loudness is leadership." Then he took a sip of tea and added, "It isn't." When Mr. Feldman called, he asked if I could come to his office before the family meeting. "Your grandfather left instructions," he said. "It would be best if we reviewed them together." My stomach tightened. "Am I in trouble?" I asked, half joking, half not. Mr. Feldman paused, then said, "No, Hannah. Quite the opposite." I went in the next day. Mr. Feldman's office smelled like paper and copier toner, and he spoke in that careful, professional way lawyers do when they're about to change your life on a Tuesday afternoon. He opened a file, slid a document toward me, and said, "Your grandfather appointed you executor of his estate." I stared at the words like they were in a different language. Me? I managed. Not my dad. Mr. Feldman gave a small, neutral shrug that somehow communicated a lot. He was very specific, he said. He amended his will last year. He wanted someone he trusted to follow his instructions. My throat tightened. "Dad is going to explode," I said, and it came out as a whisper. Mr. Feldman nodded once. "I assumed you'd know that," he replied. "Which is why I wanted to speak with you privately first." Then he handed me a letter. Grandpa's handwriting. Blocky and familiar, like the way he used to label jars in his garage. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sentimental in a Hallmark way. It was Grandpa, right down to the bluntness. He wrote that he loved Dad, but he didn't trust him with power. He wrote that he'd watched the way Dad spoke about women, about girls, like we were obligations to be managed instead of people. He wrote that he was proud of Kyle, but didn't want Kyle pressured into anything. And then, like he was putting a hand on my shoulder through the page, he wrote, "Hannah has done the work. Hannah keeps her word. Hannah will follow the instructions, even if it makes people mad. That's what I need." I sat there with tears sliding down my face, not the messy sobbing kind, just quiet, hot tears that kept coming no matter how many times I wiped them. Mr. Feldman waited. When I finally looked up, he said, "There are also conditions." That's the part Dad never expected. Grandpa didn't just divide things. He structured them. Grandpa left the bulk of his liquid assets in a trust split evenly between his grandchildren, Kyle and me, with distributions tied to milestones that had nothing to do with gender. Education, first home, business startup, emergency medical, things like that. He left my mom a fixed amount because he knew she'd be the one stuck managing Dad's mood swings. He left Dad the house, but with a lien attached. Dad would receive full ownership only if he repaid a private loan Grandpa had made him 5 years ago, money Grandpa had quietly given Dad when Dad's investment opportunity went sideways. Dad had never told anyone. Dad had also never repaid it. Grandpa documented everything. Dates, amounts, signed notes. It was all there, neatly, like he'd been waiting for someone to try to rewrite the story after he was gone. By the time the family meeting happened, I felt like I'd swallowed a live wire. That's why Dad's "girls don't need inheritance" comment hit me the way it did, because it wasn't just insulting, it was him attempting to claim the room before the truth landed. That's what he does. He narrates first, hoping nobody questions him. So when Mr. Feldman calmly said, "Miss Caldwell does," and began reading the will, I watched Dad's face change in small, frightening increments. First confusion, then irritation, then disbelief, like the words were incorrect because they didn't match his internal script. When Mr. Feldman announced, "Your father appointed Hannah Caldwell as executor," Dad actually laughed. A short, barking laugh. "That's not real," he said. "That's a typo." Mr. Feldman didn't blink. "It's signed and notarized," he replied. "It is very real." Dad turned to me then, fully, eyes sharp. "You did this," he said, like I'd tricked an old man into handing me a crown. My cheeks burned. My hands were clenched in my lap, so tightly my nails bit into my skin. "I didn't do anything," I said. "Grand pas chose." Kyle finally looked at me, eyes wide. Hannah, he whispered, like he didn't know whether to be proud or scared for me. Dad's voice rose. He chose you because you were in his ear, Dad snapped. Because you were playing nurse and secretary and whatever else. He didn't understand what he was signing. Mr. Feldman's voice cut through, still calm. Your father understood exactly what he was signing, he said, and then he read Grandpa's letter aloud. Hearing Grandpa's words in that room felt like someone turning on a light. My Aunt Denise's mouth tightened. My mom stared at the table, swallowing hard. Kyle's shoulders dropped, like he was exhaling after years of tension. Dad sat very still, face flushed, jaw working. Then Mr. Feldman got to the loan. Dad's head snapped up. What loan? He demanded, too fast. Too loud. Mr. Feldman slid the documentation across the table. This loan, he said. The room shifted. You could feel it. Like everyone suddenly realized Grandpa had seen more than we knew. Like the family narrative had hidden compartments. Dad's voice went brittle. That was between me and him, he said. It still is, Mr. Feldman replied. And now it's in writing. Dad leaned back, breathing hard through his nose. He looked at me with something close to hatred, then softened it into contempt, like hatred would make him look guilty. So what? He said, forcing a laugh. You're going to take my house away? I didn't want to answer. Not because I was afraid of being firm, but because I hated that the moment had turned into a fight. Grandpa was gone. This was the mess left behind. But I had a job now. A real one. One Grandpa trusted me with. So I said, carefully, I'm going to follow Grandpa's instructions. Dad's eyes narrowed. You think you're better than me, he said. I looked at him across that table and felt something surprisingly steady settle in my chest. No, I said. I think Grandpa wanted someone who wouldn't cave. Dad stood up, so abruptly his chair rolled back. This is unbelievable, he snapped. You're a girl. You don't even. Kyle's voice cut in, small but clear. Stop, he said, and everyone turned to him because Kyle almost never speaks in conflict. Just stop, he repeated. Grandpa made his choice. It's done. Dad's face flickered, shock that Kyle didn't fall into line. Then anger because Kyle not falling into line meant Dad was losing. The next few weeks were exhausting in a way I don't know how to describe without sounding dramatic. I spent hours on the phone with banks, accountants, the county clerk. I filed paperwork. I inventoried assets. I cried in my car in random parking lots because grief and responsibility are a brutal combination. Dad called me repeatedly, alternating between threats and fake warmth. One day he'd say, "You're tearing the family apart." The next day he'd say, "Let's talk like adults," in a voice that meant, "Let me manipulate you privately." I didn't meet him alone. I communicated through email whenever possible. I kept everything documented. Grandpa would have wanted that. There was a moment about a month in when my mom came over and sat at my kitchen table like she didn't know where to put her hands. She looked older than she had before all of this. He's furious, she whispered like I didn't know. He's saying you're doing this to punish him. I poured her tea and watched the steam rise. I'm doing this because Grandpa asked me to, I said. My mom's eyes filled. I'm proud of you, she said softly, then looked away like saying it felt dangerous. I didn't feel victorious. That's the part people don't get. Being right doesn't feel good when it costs you peace. I felt sad. I felt tired. I felt angry on Grandpa's behalf. I also felt clear, like the fog I'd lived in for years, where Dad's voice was the loudest voice, had finally lifted. Dad still says what he said that day, in different forms. He still believes women should be managed, not trusted. But now there are documents that disagree with him. Now there's a legal structure that doesn't care about his opinions. Now there's a boundary he can't shout his way through. And every time I sign another form as executor, I hear Grandpa's voice in my head. Hannah keeps her word. Thanks for watching. If you've ever had to hold the line in a family that expects you to fold, share your story in the comments. I'd really like to hear it.